So we're going to stay consistent with how we had our landowner panel. We've got 4 farmers that represent pretty much all of the state of Iowa, and we think that their experiences with how they farm, where they farm, and some of the things that they're doing will make it extremely diverse for you as far as questions that you might have. But the first thing I'd like to do is I would like to start with Lissa and have each of them give you 5-6 minute background on themselves, their operation, and then we'll take questions.
Am I on? Can you hear me? Can everybody in the back hear me? Wait, somebody, okay, good, very good. All right, my name is Elisa McFarland, and I farm in Louisa County, just outside Columbus Junction. That's in southeast Iowa, and I live across the border into Muscatine County with my husband. I did my undergrad at Iowa State. While I was at Iowa State, we had a neighbor who passed away, and he had been renting a farm that neighbored ours, and he had been renting it, and the landowner approached our family about renting it. And when I was growing up, it wasn't really something that I viewed as a career opportunity for myself. I didn't envision myself being a farm operator when I grew up. I always loved living on the farm, but I didn't envision it as really a career opportunity for me. But I've been kind of kicking around the idea while I was at Iowa State, and so my dad and I started talking about it, and he said, well, you're never going to really know what it's like until it's your name on the operating note, and you have to sell the grain and make all of those decisions. And so at that point, I used some of the Beginning Farmer programs to get started, and rented 170 acres when I was a junior at Iowa State. I was commuting back and forth and farming on the weekends while I was going to college. I then continued my education at University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I got a master's degree in soil science and agronomy. And then when I finished my degree there, I had an opportunity to work on a farm research project with National Corn. So that's what I do when I don't farm. But I still farm with my dad on the weekends and in the evenings. So I guess that's a little bit about how I ended up in farming. We have corn, soybeans, a little bit of hay, and a small cow-calf operation as well. I like to keep it pretty short and sweet and answer whatever questions you have, so I'll turn it over to the rest of the panel.
Hey, thanks for having me here. My name is Brett Pierce, and I farm in Boone County, which is just northwest of here, pretty close. I went to Iowa State and got a bachelor's in ag biz, and I started farming a couple of years out of college. I worked for Pioneer Research for a couple of years, and then started renting corn and bean ground. A few years ago, I found the love of my life, Liz, and she was working corn research, and we've got a daughter, and her name's Laura. She is in charge. She's 2 years old. She's in charge of 40 layer hens at home. So we've got about 700 acres we're renting for corn and beans. My wife has 45 head of cows, and she rents 100 acres of pasture. A lot of what we do is, I also, I need to mention too, farm with my parents, and then we harvest with my uncles. So the 4 groups share a combine. We've got 5 landlords. We do everything from crop share. We have 2 different types of flex leases, some straight cash rent. A big part of that is communication. My wife puts together a newsletter to get people notified what's going on. A big part of what we do too, I know this meeting has been a lot about conservation. We got some additional equipment at our place for doing waterways. We got an old road grader and a broadcast seeder. We just started working with cover crops and working with Elisa here this year, started up that. I guess with my family, my uncles kind of get slowed down sometimes with the combine because my dad and I like to do a lot of on-farm field trials. We have them everywhere. We test everything from nitrogen to chemicals to hybrids to fungicides. So yeah, just I guess I'll wrap that up there.
I am Kelly Blair, and I farm with my husband in north central Iowa near Dayton, just south of Fort Dodge, about 20 miles. I grew up in western Iowa in the Luss Hills. There you go, for your soils.
Soil stir.
And when I met my husband while in college, I went to Iowa State and I met my husband there. And when I was visiting what is now my farm, one of the first things that came to mind while traveling up there was just the difference in the landscape. And it was only a matter of a couple hours, and the different farming methods. So I grew up in the country of terraces, timber, permanent pasture, and pretty light soils. And when I came up to what is now our farm, it's bare black soils, square fields. There's no square fields where I came from. And so, I think I heard somebody else say that, I think it was Dan that said, there's no one size fits all when it comes to farming. And even on, what I see is a pretty similar landscape on what we do farm now, there are so many differences. So I went to Iowa State, like I said, and majored in forestry and agronomy. That doesn't mean I know anything about trees, though. I went to school for conservation. That was my passion. That still is my passion. I graduated and started working for a family hog company in the environmental aspect of it. So writing manure management plans and permitting barns and that type of thing, and making sure that they're following all the rules and regulations. I, just a few years ago, ended up working through the Iowa Soybean Association on contract for a watershed, trying to line up producers to do strip trials and learn about conservation practices on their own farm, as well as doing water monitoring on their tile of where they can control the water coming off of those farms. So this past fall and spring were my first official full-time farming seasons. So going from a farmer's daughter to a farmer is a lot different, I can say that. My husband AJ graduated in ag business, and he is the main decision maker on the farm, but I'm the organizer. And so on our farm currently right now, we farm corn, soybeans, pigs, and cattle. The pigs that we grow are in confinement, and they're custom fed and fed out for pork. And then we have cattle. We have beef cattle that we finish out in a monoslope barn, as well as we have about 40 head of the cow-calf operation. My main role, like I said, is the organization of everything, but we also have two kids, Wyatt, who's 7 going into 2nd grade, and Charlotte, who's 6 going into 1st grade. They're my main task, if you can call it that. On the acres that we farm, majority of that is not owned by us. And so we have a lot of also different leases. It's really just made up based on what the landowner wants and what our goals and their goals are. We also have a neighbor that is trying to retire, and so we are taking over a lot of his operation. And with that, he doesn't own everything, and so we've had a lot of new conversations from him passing the ground onto us. And obviously, like it was said before, there's a lot of trust. And so now we're working on building that trust with these new landowners. Relationship and communication and continual improvement is, I think, important on our farm. So, Jeff.
Hello, everybody. Jeff Pape from Dubuque County, and I get here late. Obviously, I just came in 5 minutes ago because of other commitments, and I get here and they all have nice notes lined up, and I have nothing, so we're going to wing this. But I started farming on my own in around the 2000 time frame. I grew up, I'm sixth generation on a dairy farm in Dubuque County. I had worked with a neighbor, said if you ever decide to rent your farm that we did custom work for, I'd be interested, and that's how I got started. I rented it for a couple of years, and he came to me, wanted to know if I wanted to buy it, and that's where I was able to get into my own. Graduated high school and said I don't want to be on the farm anymore after milking cows. You know, we milked about 120 to 130, and I said I got to do something different, so I went to diesel school and worked on semis for about 7.5 years. But within 1 year of leaving the farm, I was back just about every night. It drew me right back, and after a couple of years of that, I realized that I was coming back. So I came back to the home farm and farmed with my uncle and took my dad's half of the operation over. And we had some family things come up during that year, and we decided at the end of the year it was probably best if he stayed with the dairy and I stayed with the crops. And I had started a custom operation, or took over Dad's custom operation at the time. So went into custom work and went back to work off the farm and have kept farming ever since. So I've always had, seems like, 2 jobs. I still work full-time. I work for Wilson Trailer Company as a sales rep for the state of Wisconsin. And then I also farm full-time. We farm about 600 acres. We custom farm about another 800. All of our acres are 100% no-till, and that wasn't by accident. That was something when I wanted to start farming. I had saw the advantages from traveling on the road. I worked for Successful Farming for a while of some of the no-till farms I'd been on, so that's where I got my start in planting process with no-till. So I've been planting no-till since about 1997 when we first got started with that. I am married, just married 30 years. We have 2 kids, a 17-year-old daughter and a 20-year-old son. And don't, at this point, unfortunately, see any interest in the farm, although they do help when they need to. The daughter will run the combine. She's been doing that a few years, and I can put the boy in the grain cart and I can run the semis, so it does work out. I'm also the chairman for Hewitt Creek Watershed. Hewitt Creek Watershed is a first of its kind voluntarily led watershed in the state of Iowa. This started in 2005. If you were to go to HewittCreekWatershed.com, you can find a fair amount of information on what we did. We were able to go for 10 years. We got our start with some seed money from Iowa Farm Bureau. That got us our first 3-year start, and we were able to co-op some money through the state of Iowa. We did determine that changing a watershed issue isn't something you do in 2 years. I really work with the State House down here to try and teach them this. It took 7 years to see the results, and after the results started, we continued improvement. So I'm also the president of Dubuque County Farm Bureau. The farm we currently live on, I had gotten some pictures to him. I don't know if he can pull them up. I went up last night and took a few aerial pictures, and you look at the waterways that we put in. That was something that was instilled in me, actually, my grandfather. My grandfather, when I first started plowing, he would go out and mark every waterway. And boy, if you messed up a waterway, you got it. So you knew that waterway had to be there. So everything that we do, you can see, has got plentiful waterways in it. As I started farming this first farm, and I had some people come to me that were wanting to rent theirs and saw how I was doing things, they came to me and asked me. So every farm I've gotten since, they came to me. I've not gone to anybody for a farm. We actually don't run a lease on any of them. It's strictly a contract with a handshake. They trust me. They see how it's being operated, how it's taken care of. We mow their road ditches. We take care of all the waterways for them. And I do, if you want to go to, yep, there's another view of some of the waterways. We're rolling hills up there in Iowa, and to give you an idea where we're at, Hewitt Creek, if you've ever been to the Field of Dreams, you drove over Hewitt Creek. That's a little creek that runs right through the Field of Dreams. So that's kind of where our watershed is. Okay, and that's another one. That one shows a creek. We do put borders along all of our creeks. That is actually Hickory Creek. Hewitt ties into it. All the lower waterways are put in by us that are not CRP, but we felt they need to be there. The larger one is actually a CRP waterway. A majority of ours are CRP. Probably about a third of them are not. And we'll cut those probably twice a year and bale those and sell the grass off of them. So that is a rental farm. So everything we do there's lower grass area and stuff. We just leave that as is for them because they like the way it looks, and we cut and bale that the same way. Next one. That is, in the background there is our home farm. That is where I grew up. We did see the dairy leave here about 4 years ago now. My uncle didn't have anybody to take over. He said, I've milked cows for 50 years myself, and he said, I'm done. He was 61 years old. Since then, it's been filled, all the buildings have been filled with organic hogs. We have a neighbor that's an organic hog farmer. All the open lots work great for him, so they typically have between 600 and 900 head of organic hogs running around the farm. That's another view of the home farm in the back, but these trees in the front were planted by my great-grandpa, my grandpa, and my dad. Then my grandpa and dad put some more in, my dad and my brother put some in. I never got into that one there, but it's called a game area patch. My grandparents loved to see game, deer and so forth, so they put that in there. So it was, some of this has been instilled in me for many years. Go to the next picture. I think there's another one. You can click one more. Now this is my home farm. You can take one more picture. And we've got a settling basin in down here, so none of the water that leaves my waterways will ever hit the creek. I did, however, put 700 hardwood trees in. But by doing these things here that you see on my home farm is what got me people to come to me and ask to rent their farm. They saw me taking care of, making changes to something. If people don't believe no-till works, the field in the right corner is corn. He's an avid tiller. Shortly after I had these waterways in, which those took 4 times, because one of those deals where you kept getting the rain and getting washed out, but we finally got them. That field to the right drains approximately, it's a 40-acre farm, and it doesn't drain half of it, so about 18 acres. My waterway up through the middle drains approximately 60 acres. We had a 4-inch rain. The water came out of his field at a rate to take out 100 feet of my fence, and took dirt with it and everything else. That same day, that same evening when it happened, I drove with the 4-wheeler over my waterway. I could span the water coming through my waterway with the 4-wheeler. About 3 feet, 4 feet. So you tell me there's not a difference, there definitely is. So that is where my rental stuff comes from, is just by maintaining stuff properly and doing things right.
I just need to ask one thing, Jeff, because you're coming from an area that's a little bit different from the other 3. You've had a lot of water here recently. How is this handling all of the water that you've just recently gotten up in the Northeast Iowa area?
I took these pictures last night. Okay. So if that gives you an idea that everything's in good shape yet. Our farm has been very fortunate. We only got about 3 inches out of these last real heavy rains. You step north of us, they went from 3 to, I think 3 miles north, they were talking 7, and they went just above that, they were 13. That was overnight. And I do have a counterpart that's on the board of directors with me for a co-op that's all no-till also, and they have terraces and stuff in place. He did lose a couple of new terraces installed this year, but he said all the other stuff held and everything looks pretty decent. So the heavy rain's difficult to handle, but I think if you get everything in place, you can do a better job.
Any other things that came to mind? Otherwise, we're going to open it up for questions. That's the most important part. So we've got 4 great folks up here, and I see a hand out there already.
Where's the handy sign?
Right back there.
As the beginning farmers, getting started, getting going, what was probably your biggest challenge and what was maybe a big, something you didn't expect to?
Just work on down.
Okay. I guess I started farming, my first crop was 2012, and we farm right on the edge of the Iowa River Valley, and so one of the fields that I rent is about 60 acres of what most people call sugar sand or blow sand. So in 2012, that was a little rough. We didn't get much rain, I didn't harvest a lot of corn, and so that was something that was tough, but we made it through. Other things that I run into just personally, with my background in soil science and the work that I do in conservation, sometimes I have kind of the reverse conversation than what's been happening here today. And then a lot of times I am trying to push the envelope in adding cover crops and buffer strips and those sort of things, and trying to encourage the landlords that I work with to implement those practices, or at least understand what I'm doing on their land. For some of the landlords that I work with, they're older folks who are used to tilled black is what looks clean and good. And so that's something that I struggle with as, given my demographics, sometimes I feel like I get a little bit more of a, well, you know, you really ought to be doing it this way. And so as a beginning farmer, sometimes I'm caught between the conservation practices that I would like to implement and some older folks who would like me to be doing things a little bit differently. So that conversation is always very delicate, but I think I'm making some headway. I didn't bring up all my pictures, I have cover crop pictures and that kind of stuff that I can share if anybody's interested. So, another challenge has been the variability of the commodity prices. Starting in 2012 was rough because of the drought, but I was literally shaking in my shoes the first time I went in to get an operating note, and I didn't understand why my dad wasn't concerned. We had $7 corn. He didn't have anything to be concerned about. And so he was, you know, like, oh, you're going to be fine. You have $7 corn. You're fine. And I was terrified because that was a lot of zeros as a college student that were terrifying to me. And I thought I was taking out a fairly large note. And now I look back at it and it wasn't nearly as big of a deal as I made it out to be. So just understanding and the learning curve is really steep when you're talking about the sorts of numbers and the high risk decision making that you have to do. So.
Yeah, I think, I guess challenges kind of change as you start and kind of get into it a little more. Kind of the early changes was just going from a job where I worked in town to, you know, kind of embracing farming as my life, rather than thinking of it as a job, and I guess, you know, communicating with family at all times. That was kind of in the early times. Now I've kind of embraced that, and we're just loving farming out there. It's just at this time, like she touched on, with the economy kind of heading south, kind of the things that we set up in the good times, flex leases and setting a base, that gets kind of complicated when the base slides up a little easier than it can come down at these times. That's just one of the challenges that I'm having this year and past couple of years. But I think that comes down to where the flex lease allows you to share information and communicate into a huge level of flex lease. You're putting your whole entire day-to-day operations, a diary of it out on one page with all the numbers attached to it. And I think some years that can be good, and some years it makes it tough. But the last session came down to trust, and I think a big part of those flex leases think that with flex lease challenges, I think that a big part of it is communication and getting to know each other and having more and more conversations throughout the year. I know my wife is good at really meeting with them, once or twice a month or so, where I was a lot more lax at that before we met. So I think having that and stating issues as they come, I think that makes it a lot easier come March. So.
I guess mine are pretty similar to that. When we first started farming, times were pretty good for us. We were pretty lucky, and now we need to figure out exactly a little bit more what we're doing. We need to have every line item there. So organizing, the challenge of the fact that there's a lot of work, there's time with the young family, there's time that we gotta appropriate in a certain way. And so, that's a definite challenge. And another thing is, for us, was when we first started farming, all of our landowners were just one person. Now they're being passed down to a different generation. So there's not just the mom and the dad, it's now, 6 siblings that don't get along or whatever. So the challenges of being able to communicate and how you communicate and how you tread lightly sometimes, and knowing the situation, which as I married into the family, I don't really know the situation all the time, but just knowing who I'm talking to and how to have that conversation about what's going on the farm without making anybody mad.
I would agree with pretty much everything they said. I guess for me, the challenge was when I came back to the farm, it was a dairy operation, so you had to check every 2 weeks. When I came back on my own, it was a grain operation, and I never did figure out, as I looked at the grain farmers, how do you do that? You get paid once a year or twice a year. How do you get through? Well, I found out that note's there. It carries me through, but so money is always a challenge. And finding somebody willing to work with you on a rental situation is always a challenge. Ground's hard to get. Everybody wants to get that top dollar, and as she pointed out, sometimes you have to look at every line item and make sure. So we look at every farm, make sure it's handling itself and paying for itself. And if there's a problem, we'll go back to the owner and say, hey, well, just as he said, I'll lay every one of my records in front of them. I always have it on my computer. Anytime you want to look at what stuff's costing me, go for it, and we need to talk about it. Every one of them's okay with adjusting. They understand things go up and down, and we've moved up and down with them. Probably one of the other challenges is, as a young producer, I think for a lot of them, is understanding the availability of information. They've had college careers behind them, but some of them still come out of college. It's still the school of hard knocks. And being able to communicate with somebody that's been there and done some of these mistakes that we think we can do better, but they've been tried and true for the last 50 years. There's a reason some things get done the way they are. So to have somebody there to go to and ask questions and talk to, I think is equally as important as having the educational background and your own experience. What I like to say with our county farm bureaus, I said we need young leaders on our board just as importantly as we do with the older leaders. And the reason being is the young leaders will bring new ideas to us, and a few of us with a little more time in the business can say, okay, we can do that. That might be a new idea we never thought of, but we can help curve it and guide it down a path to help save some of those bumps in the road. And I think that's an important thing to young cooperators. If somebody's able to help give them guidance, it's a big benefit. Next question. Probably keep that one down there.
So for each of you, would you like to own more of the land that you farm? And if you would, what are the barriers that keep you from purchasing more of your own land?
Is this mic on also? Good? Okay. Absolutely would love to own more. We bought another farm next to us 2 years ago. Obvious barrier is money. the cost of land in our particular area is between $11,000 and $13,000 an acre. It does not pencil out, so you're gonna have to have some initial ground paid for to help pay for the second one. So that's the big barrier. On the other side of that, rental ground is nice. Should something happen, you can always just back off and say, hey, I'm not doing that next year. So there's plus and minuses to both. The owned ground is nice. When you look down the road for retirement or for a family member to help get them started. In my situation, I bought a farm completely separate from the family farm, so it was pretty much like starting on your own. And it is, if they own ground, they can attest to that, and you do. It's a challenge today with today's prices.
I would say the same, money is the biggest barrier, and as a young farmer taking over, we're taking over our neighbor's operation, we're not owning anything about machinery, so at a time for us right now, we need to look at, if we try and might be able to buy some ground, is it gonna pencil out? Because as we're trying to take over, we might put ourselves into a really risky position by trying to buy ground as we're trying to take over for this neighbor, and he's counting on us to do that. So sometimes, it's about weighing what's going to work. But then, for our family farm, I also know that eventually some of it will be passed down. It's not all of it, and I'm not looking forward to that day for the obvious reason of why it's going to be passed down. But we just have to weigh what we need and what we want at that time.
Yeah, I guess, when you kind of think about it as housing, why did you rent that house for 10 years when you could have been, had 10 years of payments on one? It's just that right now, in my area and everyone else's area probably, it seems like that difference between the rented ground price per acre and if you took out a 30-year note on a piece of ground, it seems like a pretty big difference. Also, being able to just come up with the down payment is big on, even if you were looking at 40 acres at this time. So.
I guess I don't have too much more to add. Pretty much the same story at our place. I will say that I'm in a little bit of a unique situation in that in my family, most people either became farmers or lawyers, so we have a long history of documenting everything, which is nice. This whole concept of back of the napkin leases, I don't think my family has ever done that because we have a lot of lawyers in our family. But what's really nice is that my siblings are very supportive of my career in farming and view their careers as their own separate, something separate from the family's farm, which is unique. And I always like to talk about when people ask me questions about our farm that I can't give my family enough credit for supporting me in my career. My siblings, like I said, they are interested in continuing the family business, maybe investing in farmland on their own, but aren't looking, and they've documented that through the legal documents that we have, that they're very much interested in supporting my ability to continue the family operation and become an owner of our family's farmland directly, as well as the machines and the infrastructure that we have set up at our house. So.
More questions?
Yeah, good experience. Are there different barriers from adopting conservation practices on land that lease compared to land that you own, to control this, or just different challenges or barriers from the different types of land you farm on?
So I already talked about this a little bit. Some of the folks that own our land are very interested in conservation, others not so much. We're kind of a range of different landowners. And on our home place, that's currently predominantly owned by my father. So he's very interested in conservation on that land for sure. That's where we do most of our cover crop acres. When it comes to the rented land, I put cover crops on my rented land, and sometimes I get a little bit of static for that, partly because it's right on Highway 92. And so I don't really have a choice of hiding my conservation experiments like some people do. So I pretty much have mine right out there in the open. So that's a challenge, but other than that, I mean, it's pretty much what we've done, already commented on it, so.
Yeah, for me, I guess it was actually the landowner that came to me in the first place and said, I really am interested in this, and we'd like to see you put some cover crops out there. And we did. Last year was the first round of it, and it worked really good. I mean, we haven't done a yield check or soil tilth test or anything with that farm yet, but like I said, it was the landowner that came to me first on getting it going, and like I said, we like to test stuff out at our place, so we went for it. Also on another farm, signed up with Soil Health Partners, and so we're doing some strip trials in another field too. So, but I guess some of the barriers would be the cost. Whether that first one I told you about is a crop share, so maybe we can work something out on a 50-50 or something. But there is some costs involved after you've used up your first year with the NRCS.
So on our ground, we don't really make decisions based on whether it's owned or rented on the stuff that we do infield, obviously. So we no-till all of our soybeans into standing corn stalks. We do strip tillage. We have cover crops on quite a bit of our ground, and majority of it rented. But I think, the barriers, like you said, is, the cost of maybe putting it in, if that can be shared, or in some of the cases, we do utilize state funding for cover crops on our farm, and there's a cap for that. So we met our cap, so we had the landowner use their farm and get some money for himself to be able to pay for it, because that's what he wanted. And so there are costs to it, but some of the benefits, we moved to no-till, and that's a benefit for the land, but it's also a benefit to us. It saves us a lot of time. It's one less pass over the field. So I think there are barriers to it, but then I think, like we've talked at this conference, the benefits of it, I think, sometimes outweigh those barriers.
I would agree that there's always a barrier, but in our particular case, the rented land gets treated the same as anything we own, regardless. On the rented land, as far as any CRP, that contract goes with the landowner. I do put it in for them. They do usually pay me to do it. I will mow it and maintain it, but I don't charge them to do that. I just take care of it because I want it to stay weed-free and take care of it best as possible. Cover crops, we've done them since probably 2007, and I, again, treat any field the same, whether it's mine or theirs. I do have some cost share this year for the first time on a couple of farms, and I just didn't put cover crop on for that reason, because you can't, if you've done it previously, you don't get any cost share. Cover crops aren't cheap. Depending how you put them on, we've done a lot of aerial, we've done seeding. It just depends on timing with my custom work. I don't have time to do the seeding in the fall, so most of mine's been aerial. Aerial cover crops work if you get followed by rain, but if you hit a dry spell, you're just not going to have a decent cover crop stand. However, we've seen some of them turn up in the spring and actually turn out pretty good in the spring. So as far as any structures or anything, most of my rented land doesn't have anything besides waterways. And again, those were covered by the landowner. We did a lot of the work. We hired the people to come in and do them. We seeded them and took care of them that way. I think any other barrier, when people start talking no-till versus I know she made a comment earlier, people that love that black dirt and the green rose come up. I agree, I love it. I got neighbors, that looks awesome. But I had landowners that weren't happy at first and didn't like the way no-till looked. And after they started seeing some of the benefits and they started seeing these heavy rains and realizing after 3 or 4 years this water's infiltrating the ground, they totally did a 180. They wouldn't have it any other way. So I think the barrier sometimes, like she said, can be looks. We're fairly fortunate in our area. We have a fair amount of cover crop going all around through because of our watershed and how it got started. And people recognize it and they know it's a good thing. In fact, when one farm I didn't have it on for 2 years, I got questioned every year, why didn't you put a cover crop in? You always do. Well, there's a reason. But I didn't like leaving it that way, but there's certain farms that I could deal with it.
So you're telling me to stick with it?
Absolutely. The biggest thing that I learned is you're doing this for yourself. And I don't care what that guy driving by thinks. And I do trials myself as he does. I don't care where I put them. I'll put them where they're best going to work for me. If there's too much of this, I got to look a certain way for the guy driving by. He's not paying my bills. I am. And I want my ground to be better when I leave it than when I started. And I fully believe I'm doing that. We look at organic matter measurements. We've been doing soil samples since I started in early 2000. And we're pulling organic matters up. There's not a whole lot of places to bring organic matter up and tell you that they are honestly doing it. And we'll bring it to our landlords, we'll show it to them. We make sure they're fully aware of what we're putting on. Anytime they ask a question, which they don't anymore, now it's me, I just bring it to them voluntarily. So, but communication is key.
Thank you, everybody. You guys are all doing great things and you to be really exemplary farmers, but unfortunately it seems like there's way too many farmers out there who are not. And I'm wondering, because clearly today we can all see there are solutions to these problems of soil loss and water pollution. And so I'm wondering what you think of the idea of requiring all farmers to use just the basic conservation practices, buffers and grass waterways and no-till, maybe some cover crop. I know we can't do a one-size-fits-all, but surely there are some basic things that our farmers should be required to do. And so I'm interested in what you think about that. And then secondly, Jeff and the rest of you too can speak to this. I'm wondering if you said that landlords come to you because they see how well you are treating the land and they want you to farm it. Are you seeing any farmers in your area starting to emulate your practices where they see the benefits that are accruing to you? And then my final question is, how long are your leases? I think that affects people's decision making as well.
I'm going to jump on this one right away. First of all, regulations to me don't work, in my opinion. Now, I agree somewhat with what you're saying. I do think there is a way to do some regulations, but allow the flexibility for different practices that fit your farm, that I think you should have to do some of them to receive any kind of farm payment. I mean, that's my opinion on that. I think when you talk about is anybody doing what I've done or following, a great example is within our watershed. It's our next door neighbor to our home farm. I went to him, his second year in it, and I said, this is what we're offering for incentives. Nope, nothing in there for me. I got nothing you can do. Okay, fine. You're not going to get everybody. It's unfortunate, but there's some people you're just not going to change. But if we could change, in our case, we got 85% of our people in our watershed involved. Is 85% better than nobody? Absolutely. So even if we got 50% of the people doing something decent, would be an improvement probably over where we're at. So this neighbor, even though he would not come to the meetings, he didn't have any desire to, the last 3 years, he's put in terraces, he's gone into contour farming, and he's used cover crops the last 2 years. And none of it was through our watershed, but he did it on his own. But the guys to the south of him, me, the guys to the east of him, my uncle, The guys to the north of him, a neighbor, were all doing it. He's in the middle. He felt the pressure. So I do feel there is some peer pressure to it. And I do see that not just there, but in other areas of the county. And I think it's an acceptance thing. Cover crops aren't something everybody's wanting to do, but they have to understand them. So that brings me to my last point. I don't think that regulation is the answer, but I think one of the biggest things, and I say this so often in places I go to speak, it's education. How did we get the participation we did in our watershed? In my opinion, we as farmers, especially the college educated ones, probably know a lot more about soil and about things of this than I did going into this, but we think we know it. But once we got into our watershed, we started bringing speakers in from Iowa State and explaining a phosphorus index, a soil conditioning index, some of these things. These guys started scratching their head and going, well, geez, all I got to do is quit hauling manure on that field and move it here, and this will raise my score. Well, you knew that. I mean, when you look at a soil sample on a heavy livestock area like we're in, right around that farm's a hot spot, and that comes from years ago where you couldn't get out in the winter, so you got it close to the farm and got rid of your manure. Now these guys have equipment to move it to the back side of this farm or to the other farm down the road that hasn't had any for years. But I think the biggest thing for us was education and understanding how phosphorus moves in the soil, understanding how nitrogen moves in the soil. Just the basics. We as a farmer know that it takes this much and this much and this much to grow a crop, but do we know where it goes once we put it out there and how to regulate it? Why do we want to split our nitrogen process, some with the planter, some later, or something in that case, or an inhibitor? We had to educate them. And I'll be honest with them, a lot of them come to us and said, you know, I really thought I knew this, but I know a lot more now than I used to. Well, they talk to each other at church or at the local picnic and stuff, and they start talking about this stuff, and that other one that wasn't involved also came to the meeting because he's learning stuff. So part of the reason when we first started, we had low attendance, probably the first few meetings. They were afraid it was a regulated deal, that they were going to be told what to do. Once they learned they could do it on their own and learn from it, the attendance went up, and away we went from there. Did that answer everything for you?
I think, like you said, I'm an advocate for agriculture, and so I'm not just advocating to consumers of what we do on the farm every day to let them know, I'm also advocating to other farmers what we're doing. And so, just from that aspect, is on our farm, the way we got started is by learning from others. We had to ask questions. Well, how did you deal with this when this came up? As far as it being regulated across the board, I'm sure there probably does need to be some regulation, but I want to be at that table when that regulation is made. And so I'm making a point to try to be involved in that, because I don't want it to hurt my operation, but I know that water quality is important, so I need to be up there and I need to be present. I don't believe that, I believe it needs to be a watershed approach. This shotgun throwing out a whole bunch of money for practices that aren't precise and figured out what's going to make the best decision for the landscape. It's kind of like how we run our farm is you can't just throw money at it and hope it goes away. We want to be sure that what we're doing is making a difference. We have also had landlords come to us, asking about, I see you're doing this, and I think, again, being able to have a farmer network of folks, and we've had people come ask us how we do cover crops and that type of thing. So I think we even help some landlords find some people that do some of those practices because we know about them and that type of thing. So it's a pretty good partnership, I think. And then how long our leases are, honestly, we have some formal leases, we have some back in napkin, some handshake. Honestly, for us, the ones we know are going to be long-term are the ones that sit down to the table with us, want to have conversations, have questions. And the conversation isn't all about how much they're getting. The ones that we know are going to be short-term are the ones that are just waiting for the check. Hey, when's it coming? And that's all we hear from them that year. So I don't know that the lease length, and she might disagree, but for us on our farm, I don't know that the lease length matters as much as the relationship and the communication that we have. Yeah.
I want to add one thing. I didn't answer your lease thing. Something I did see in our area, the landlords that went after the highest rent have the worst ground. Most of those guys are farming that ground straight through and not doing anything else to preserve it because they're trying to get every dollar they can to find it. The landlords I work with, like I said, are just back and forth, year-to-year contract. We just talk about it. But being able to talk about it and understand how we're taking care of it, we can work with the value. They understand that, yeah, they can get more, but are they going to get their ground taken care of? So it comes down to, do we want it taken care of, we just want the money.
Yeah, as far as this conversation goes, I just wanted to note that I guess conservation is a long-term, I guess, goal. If you look back 30 or 40 years ago, there was snow drifts in the ditch that were black. Then the advent of the Glencoe soil saver started to change some directions. What I'm getting at is that there's farmers that are meeting all the time for constant improvement and are changing things voluntarily. It's a slow process, but I feel like that the rules would just add to, I guess, the two sides being further apart. I just, as far as the terms of the lease, I only do a 1 year with all ours, but then, like she said, it's with the relationship. The one that I rent from on a yearly basis, they've signed me up to be the executor of their estate, so they've got some trust there. As far as the neighbors on the conservation side, we've, I guess, I hate to use this word in this room, but people like to have us come out and use our tile plow in their fields sometimes, so they like what we're doing on that. So, thank you.
So I guess I feel like I'm still learning a lot from our neighbors in our community because I am a younger farmer. However, given my background and the technical things that I work on for my off-farm job, a lot of times my neighbors, my farmer neighbors, will contact me about the research that we're doing in my background in soil science. In general, I guess I don't have any specific stories of times where our conservation practices resulted in us renting land. I think it's more an overall attitude and participation in the community that my family has always been very active in the community and well respected. And everybody seems to think that my dad is a really calm, like even-keeled person, which I suppose he is if you're on a committee or have a landlord-tenant relationship with my dad. If you're a daughter, it's a little bit different, but especially if you're trying to learn how to back up a planter, he's not nearly so even-keeled then. But I think that overall, understanding of stewarding not only our own farm, but our community in general. We live in a pretty rural area with not a lot of external resources. We don't have a lot of big companies in our community to help support things, so we do a lot of service to the community just in general from our family. And so I think that's really what gets us more than any particular practice they see on our farm. It's just an overall attitude of conservation about only our farm, but the community that we live in. And then the specific question about lease terms, most of ours are at least 10 years. And that has somewhat to do with the conservation practice that we have and the relationships that we have with our landlords. And then also in our area, we have some center pivot irrigation, which kind of throws a little bit of a wrinkle into lease arrangements too, just on some of the permitting and management of those machines. So.
I guess in my opinion, for simplicity reasons, it's a straight cash rent. And it's something that's fair to both sides. And being discussed yearly is probably the way that would have to be done. I think if you're in a really challenged area for land like we are, the crop shares might be an option to get the landlord a little more money. And I have no problem with that, but for me, it's a lot easier to be able to figure my finances on a cash rent basis. When you've got payments to make and you're trying to market grain and trying to figure out the market, you know this much has to be paid regardless. Otherwise, on some of the flex leases, you don't know until you've got a harvest done. So.
I think the one that we like the most is the variable cash lease. So it's a lot like a cash rent, but then it's on a percentage basis based off of the crop prices on the terms of the lease. It's throughout the year, and we take the average of it. So we do take some risk in that, and then, like he said, being able to talk to them about what did happen this year with prices and the land and that type of thing.
I think it's, for me, it's kind of a case-by-case basis, I guess. I do like having a rate that is somehow tied to where the economy is at, however you come up with that number for a payment.
I kind of would agree with Kelly and Brett that being able to have it somewhat tied is great, but then to Kelly's point about having that minimum level that you know that you're going to have to for the same reasons regarding being able to plan out in advance and not waiting all till the end. So I guess kind of the hybrid approach I think would be ideal, but my ideal situation, since you're describing that, is one where we can have a conversation like Jeff is able to and lay out all of our expenses and where we're at and be very transparent and have an open conversation about that and have the landlord ask the questions. I think would be interesting and the best option. And we have that relationship with two of the farm landlords that we work with, and we have a big summer meeting, and we take a tour through our whole farm and they ask questions. And I think that's the part that I find most beneficial as an operator is I don't always see the same things because I'm there every day, and so being able to have them ask questions is really important because I want to know what their concerns are because they might be different than mine.
Very good. We will wrap it up with that last question. I just wanted one final comment. First of all, to thank all four of these folks for taking their time. There's never a good time to bring farmers out of the field for a meeting. There's always something to do, and they volunteered right away. And the other thing I just want to say is, we talk a lot about technology today in agriculture and what it enables us to do, but it's these folks, people like this, that is going to allow agriculture to take that big step forward. We've got issues that have got to be handled, but when you listen to these folks and what they're doing in their communities, I think we can handle those situations. We just need to have more of them. So, thank you, and let's show us our